Ask not what your country can do for you. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
We gave the United States a foreign policy which put us at the head of the free nations of the world.
Republican and Democrat, we are all Americans.
I'm John Wright. I'm here with former United States Senator Jack Danforth. Jack, it's good to be with you today.
Good to be with you, John. Thanks.
Let's get right into it. Last time we were together, we talked a bit about the evolution of the Republican Party from the Reagan era into the Trump era. President Reagan, who you knew and worked with in Washington, discussed the theme of the peaceful transfer of power in his first inaugural address in 1981. Let's take a look at a short passage from that speech.
To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle.
You were a United States Senator at that time. I assume you might have been in attendance that day.
It was. It goes without saying. Of course. And the tradition was that the outgoing president, even the defeated outgoing president, would be there for the inauguration.
Yeah.
That was very symbolic of the transfer of power. Of course, Trump was not, he boycotted Biden's inauguration. So that was a symbolic act, right? It was to say, no, this is not going to be a peaceful transfer of power. I was also there when Jimmy Carter was sworn in, and he had just defeated Gerald Ford. President Carter, during the beginning of his inaugural speech, made it a point of complimenting Gerald Ford on how he held the country together. That was an age when people could disagree strongly on partisan questions, on policy questions, and yet respect the other person as a human being, and respect the Constitution and the process.
One of the most painful concessions in the history of U.S. presidential elections, it seems to me, must surely have been that of Al Gore in 2000. Vice President Gore had won the national popular vote by 500,000 votes in his race against George W. Bush, but he lost the Electoral College vote because he lost the state of Florida, a state in which 5.8 million votes were cast, by a mere 537 votes, a difference of less than 1/100th of a percentage point. And after just a few weeks of recounts and a few weeks of court process, Vice President Gore conceded the election.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. Let there be no doubt, while I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession. I also accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends.
Well, he was respecting the election. He was respecting the legitimacy of the next president. He was respecting court decisions, including the Supreme Court decision. Imagine, he has been the vice president, he was running for president of the United States, and it was all in the balance for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then that kind of statement. But although it was remarkable, it wasn't unusual.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not unusual because in our history until the year 2020, every loser in a race for the presidency conceded defeat.
Yeah.
Everyone. That was it. That was the standard. It was obvious. It was expected. And for one time, it was not.
In America, elections are an essential part of our political freedom. And so it's obviously critical to a well-functioning democracy that our election systems are of unimpeachable integrity. And in fact, in the United States, they are of unimpeachable integrity. Study after study shows this. We've got multiple eyes looking at every precinct, every county, every state, over and over again, independent checks. And all of those oversight organizations in 2020 came out and affirmed that, in their own words, the November 3rd election of 2020 was the most secure in American history. A final safeguard that is available to our system are challenges through a court process from a losing campaign. In the 2020 election process, President Trump and his allies filed 62 different lawsuits around the country and ultimately lost 61 of them. And they were presided over by approximately 90 independent state and federal judges. They included 10 federal judges that had been appointed by President Trump himself. They included 22 federal judges who had been appointed by Republican presidents. They included 24 elected or appointed Republican state judges, states all around the country.
Okay, so I was one of 8 people, all Republicans, all lawyers, who reviewed every count of every lawsuit that was filed. Now, the 8 of us included retired federal judges, a retired Solicitor General of the United States, and the leading Republican expert on election law. That was the group of 8 people, and we reviewed every count of every case. And one of the conclusions that we reached, really the main conclusion in that report, was as follows, 72-page report. One of the conclusions was there was no fraud that changed the outcome of even a single precinct. No fraud. So the upshot of all this is that there is no possibility. I mean, zero. I'm not talking about infinitesimal. There is no possibility that the 2020 election was stolen. None. And yet, a huge majority of Republicans believe that it was. So they've been told that it was stolen. They've been told, stop the steal. They've been told this is massive fraud. They've been given stories about, plane loads of ballots or whatever, election machines, all of this. They've been told all of this over and over again. And when people are told a big lie over and over again, a lot of people will believe it. I would like to be able to say that the assertion that the 2020 election was stolen is a crackpot idea. That would be too generous. It's an intentional assertion made to undercut public confidence in an election. And when you think about it, well, it's right there in the Declaration of Independence. Our government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. So the assertion that the whole system is corrupt and that it was stolen is something that undermines public confidence on which American democracy depends. It's a very serious matter, and it's not just crackpot. It's very sinister.
These legal allegations made by the Trump team were accompanied by a pressure campaign against state and local officials, Republican state and local officials from around the country. The next clip shows testimony from Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger before Congress about his experience in the 2020 election. And it features clips from that phone call that he recorded with President Trump that's so well known.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Mr. Secretary, was the president here asking you for exactly what he wanted? One more vote than his opponent.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find. We had continued to look. We investigated, like I just shared the numbers with you. There were no votes to find. That was an accurate count that had been certified. And as our general counsel said, there was no shredding of ballots.
Please tell us what you, your wife, even your daughter-in-law experienced regarding threats from Trump's more radical followers.
Well, after the election, my email, my cell phone was doxxed, and so I was getting text all over the country, and then eventually my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting. You have to understand that Trish and I, we met in high school, and we've been married over 40 years now, and so they started going after her, I think, just to probably put pressure on me. Why don't you just quit, walk away? And so that happened. And then some people broke into my daughter-in-law's home, and my son has passed, and she's a widow and has 2 kids, and so we're very concerned about her safety also.
And Mr. Secretary, why didn't you just quit and walk away?
Because I knew that we had followed the law and we had followed the Constitution, and I think sometimes moments require you to stand up and just take the shots when you're doing your job, and that's all we did. You know, we just followed the law and we followed the Constitution. And at the end of the day, President Trump came up short. But I had to be faithful to the Constitution. And that's what I swore an oath to do.
So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
Why are Republican officials like Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger losing elections around the country?
I'm sorry to say this, but I think that as far as Republicans who vote, a lot of Republicans who vote in primary elections, it's become a personality cult. And so if you're either for the personality, that's Donald Trump, and with total loyalty, or you're viewed as a traitor to him and by extension to the Republican Party. So you're portrayed as being somebody who's not a real Republican. You're a rhino, you're a Republican in name only. That's what's happened, I'm sorry to say, to a large part of my party. I don't think this is the permanent state, but I think that's the condition right now.
You look at the office holders who have left or lost their official positions. Mitt Romney's retiring this year. Liz Cheney lost. She was the 3rd most powerful Republican in the House, lost in a local primary, her seat 2 years ago. Look at the transition of the values of the party. Is it too much to say that the Republican brand has been taken over and has become a subsidiary of the Trump organization?
Well, I think that it's a temporary coup, and I don't concede that the traditional Republican Party is dead. Yeah. That's what's said by, the so-called populists and the MAGA people. The old Republican Party is dead. The old Republican Party has existed since 1854. The old Republican Party has existed since Abraham Lincoln. The overall Republican Party extends through Ronald Reagan, the Bushes, the kind of people I served with in the U.S. Senate, Howard Baker, Bob Dole, all of these people. That's the Republican Party. And it has a very proud tradition. And it's very important to America to have a political party that you could call it center-right, but it's responsible, it's in the center, it's conservative. It's very important to the stability of our country to have that. And what we have instead is a personality cult that really isn't conservative. And it's not traditional. It's something brand new. And the idea of claiming that elections are stolen, of inciting a mob to attack the Capitol, and then claiming that mob, that these are really patriots, that the people who are in prison are hostages, that they're warriors and all of that. I mean, this is the opposite of what my party is. It's the opposite. It's not just different. It's the opposite. It's one way or the other. You either stand for the principles of the Republican Party or you stand for this corruption of those principles.
Most people think about January 6th. They think about the Capitol riot. They think about windows being broken and people shouting and so on and so forth. But the Capitol riot itself, as terrible as it was not the most significant part of that series of events. So what I'd like to do with the rest of our time today is to dig in to the fake elector scheme that was put forth by attorneys in the White House who worked for President Trump and was attempted to be executed on January 6th through the counting of electoral votes. The mechanics of this system are that on November 3rd, the popular vote takes place. We all know about that day because most of us participate in it. In the days and weeks after the vote, the results are tabulated at the county level by local officials in counties all across the state, all across the country. The Secretary of State certifies the result, sends it to the governor of that state. The governor of each state signs and seals something called a certificate of ascertainment that certifies which candidates' electors were chosen by that state. The governor then sends that certificate from his or her state to the National Archivist in Washington, D.C. The National Archivist collects all of these certificates from the 50 states by December 23rd and forwards them to the Vice President of the United States in his or her capacity as the President of the Senate, so that the Vice President can open the certificates and count them in front of a joint session of Congress on January 6th. That's the process. What happened in the aftermath of the 2020 election is that in 7 swing states, additional sets of electors came forward and created fake certificates of ascertainment and pretended as if they were their state's true electors. And then they mailed them in to the National Archivist in Washington, D.C., and represented that their certificates were actually the real certificates from their state. On January 6th, the certificates are all placed in a particular mahogany box that has been the tradition in our country for many, many decades. The box is brought in to the joint session of Congress. The Vice President opens the box and opens the certificates and announces the results of each state one by one, alphabetically, before the joint session of Congress. The idea was that they would give the Vice President a pretext for opening the mahogany box, holding up 2 sets of electoral certificates from the state of Arizona, say, and saying, goodness, I have 2 sets of certificates from Arizona, one for Biden and one for Trump. We're going to have to toss this state out and resolve it in another way. Most elucidating, I think, is an internal memorandum from White House Attorney John Eastman, dated December 2020. And he spelled out to team members how this would work. He says that on January 6th, when he gets to Arizona, the Vice President announces that he has multiple slates of electors. He announces, says John Eastman, that because of the ongoing disputes in the 7 states, there are no electors that can be deemed validly appointed in those states. There are at this point 232 votes for Trump, 222 for Biden. Pence then gavels President Trump as reelected. This was the idea that was developed in the White House in December of 2020.
At the request of the Trump campaign, the electors from these battleground states signed documents falsely asserting that they were the, quote, duly elected electors from their state, and submitted them to the National Archives and to Vice President Pence in his capacity as President of the Senate. Here is what some of the fake elector certificates look like as compared to the real ones. But these ballots had no legal effect. In an email produced to the Select Committee, Dr. Eastman told a Trump campaign representative that it did not matter that the electors had not been approved by a state authority. Quote, the fact that we have multiple slates of electors demonstrates the uncertainty of either. That should be enough.
I mean, the reason this is so jarring, the whole scheme, just think about it. So let's say that the vice president is also the candidate for the losing incumbent president. He's a Republican. So if the idea was to change the election, the vice president would simply state that he's looked in the box here, the mahogany box, pulled out two different sheets of paper, and said, well, there are two sheets of paper here, so I won't count either of them. I mean, honestly, the whole thing is so ridiculous. If that were the law, then you would create a situation where there would be precedent in every election for the vice president overturning the result.
But just to explore it, I mean, it seems absurd, but what if Mike Pence had pulled out two ballots? What if he had done what the Eastman memo suggested he do and try to set a state aside? We're outside of the boundaries of law at this point. We're outside of the boundaries of the Constitution for the first time in American history. What happens next?
Mike Pence is an honorable person, and he did the right thing, and that's very good for the country. If he had done as Trump wanted him to do, it would have been a national upheaval. It would have been rioting in the streets, and it would be, okay, what's going to happen to the military? You know, well, where is the military? Does the military agree with the vice president? Does the military agree that this was a fraudulent scheme? What does it do? It would have been a catastrophe for the country. It would have been a catastrophe. You think the riot of January 6th was a big deal. This would have been a catastrophe, and it wouldn't have ended in a few hours. It would have continued. It would have been right there day after day after day of violence.
Well, and to the extent there would have been violence in the streets, one law that is on the books is called the Insurrection Act, which gives the President of the United States, under certain unusual circumstances, the ability to use the power of the military on domestic soil.
And he would have done it. We would literally have been a military dictatorship.
Let's look at some examples of the pressure that he put upon the vice president on January 6th to try to get the vice president to do that bidding and hold up both slates of electors to put us into that constitutional crisis.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves. But it's going to happen.
These are our streets!
$20 a picture.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify. And we become president, and you are the happiest people. Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. Because you'll never, ever take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
Get back, ladies! Get back, ladies!
It's 21 priority. We just had protesters. Peace circle, breach the line. We need backup.
Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Hold the line! Back the line!
42. We're about 5 miles out. We're trying to make our way through all this. We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol to the upper level!
Without objection, the Chair declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth. Bring out Pence. Bring out Pence. Bring out Pence. We need an area for the House members. They're all walking over now through the tunnels. We're trying to hold the upper deck. We're trying to hold the upper deck now. We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support. We lost the line. We lost the line. All MPDs pull back. All MPDs pull back up to the upper deck. All MPDs pull back to the upper deck.
I mean, Jack, you gave your entire career to the service of our country and our Constitution, and you spent most of that career in Washington in that building.
I think it was one of the darkest days, maybe the darkest day in the history of our country. I mean, what would be in competition with it? Maybe firing on Fort Sumter or something, I don't know. But it was right there as one of the darkest days in the history of our country. It was just terrible. And it was developed, as you pointed out, so methodically. It was a plan. It just wasn't a riot that sprang up. This was something that was created, prepared for, thought of, legal memoranda suggesting just how it should be done. And a clear violation of our Constitution. Clear. No doubt about it. And it led to this. And it came to a head on January 6th, But it was a result of everything that went before it, all the assertions that the election was stolen. And then the aftermath of it, where right now a strong majority of people in my party believe that the election was stolen. Believing that is a very serious matter. Basically, having a large part of our country have a vote of no confidence in our constitutional order, saying the Constitution is nothing, the constitutional order is nothing, the peaceful transfer of power is nothing, and that it all can be subverted by this jerry-rigged scheme. All of that can be done. So it's continuing. And the question has to be put to the American people. What do you think of it? I mean, the question has to be before us because we as a country always have to restate what we really believe. And we always have to restate whether we do or do not support and defend the Constitution of the United States. We have to do that repeatedly. So it's really important to put this question to the American people, and especially to my political party, the Republican Party. Subsequent to the riot, I think it was about a year after that, the Republican National Committee met, and it passed a resolution. And the resolution claimed that January 6th was legitimate political discourse. Is that really what we believe? I mean, shouldn't that question be put to every Republican office holder or every aspirant for political office? Where does the buck stop in our country? Ultimately, where does it stop? Can you just pass it to somebody else? Or do you have to say, no, I've got a responsibility for this? And my responsibility is to be very clear about where I stand. Was what happened on and before January 6th, was that right? Was that really patriotism? Do you call people patriots who undermine the Constitution? Do you call people patriots who say hang Mike Pence? Or who wear T-shirts in the Capitol building that say Camp Auschwitz? Are those patriots? Is that the position of our party? And every Republican should answer that. And if they say yes, then that's their position. I don't think they will. If you put the question to people, most Republicans would say, this is really sick.
I mean, one of the things that's striking to me is that my understanding, based on what I've read about the criminal prosecutions of people who broke into the Capitol on that day, is that many of these people did not have criminal records. You know, many of them were former police officers or former members of the military, teachers, dentists, just in many ways regular people who felt like they were doing something patriotic, who felt, many of them even said on tape, we are here because we are here to serve our president who has called us here to save the country. Yeah. So people have been lied to so much. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And we can't tell the difference
it's
because
the big lie.
Yeah.
And they've fallen for it because they wanted to believe this man, and they are concerned about the country, and they're concerned about all the things he mentioned. They're concerned about immigration, they're concerned about the economy, they're concerned about the direction of the country, and they feel that they've been picked on. I think a lot of Trump supporters believe they've been bullied, and Trump's their bully, and they want to believe in him. So if he says it, he's their guy. But I'm going to say that it's really important to our country to revive a responsible, conservative Republican Party. And that's what we have to do. and it's bigger than this one election. It's really, that's what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do with and this whole movement, our Republican legacy, is to stand for the basic principles of our party. And they include respect for the rule of law and support of the Constitution. How would you like to be a Republican today? It's taken my state. How would you like to be a Republican? It's absolutely awful, but it's not what our party is, not what our party has been, not what our party must be in the future. It's just not. This is deviant. It's a deviation from the Republican Party, and it's really important for us to restore our party as the upright, principled, admirable participant in American politics that it's been ever since 1854.
This slide shows the language of an important federal statute, which makes it illegal to engage in a conspiracy to defraud the United States. It says if two or more persons conspire to defraud the United States, and one or more such persons do any act to affect the object of the conspiracy, each shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 5 years. This is one of the provisions that Department of Justice Special Counsel Jack Smith is prosecuting President Trump under. I don't know if you have a point of view about it.
Sure, I do. I think he should be prosecuted.
You know Washington better than I do. If Trump is reelected in November, this case will not, just timing-wise, it will not have worked its way through the court system.
Right.
Many believe that Trump will simply direct the DOJ to call off the prosecution.
No doubt.
And pardon himself.
No doubt. It's part of the subversion of the rule of law.
Well, there are other prosecutions that are taking place. I mean, these events of the fake elector scheme involve the violation of multiple laws in multiple states, and dozens of people are being prosecuted as we speak. In the state of Arizona, all of the folks who posed as fake electors are being prosecuted, were indicted by a grand jury on counts of fraud and forgery and conspiracy. In the state of Michigan, the folks who put themselves forward as fake electors are being criminally prosecuted. In the state of Georgia, a number of individuals have been prosecuted, and in fact, 4 have already pled guilty, including 3 of Trump's senior attorneys. One of Trump's attorneys, Jenna Ellis, who figured prominently in the media in November and December of 2020, issued this apology after her guilty plea in court.
What I did not do, but should have done, Your Honor, was to make sure that the facts the other lawyers alleged to be true were in fact true. In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges to the election in several states, including Georgia, I failed to do my due diligence. I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse. For those failures of mine, Your Honor, I have taken responsibility already before the Colorado bar who censured me, and I now take responsibility before this court and apologize to the people of Georgia. Thank you.
Several other senior attorneys in President Trump's staff have already pled guilty to these charges. Kenneth Chesbrough, one of the senior attorneys who helped to develop the fake elector scheme, along with Attorney John Eastman, Sidney Powell, and then another individual, Scott Graham Hall. The rest of these cases are still working their way through the court system. One of the more notable elements of this from a criminal prosecution perspective to me is that a number of Republican members of Congress asked for pardons.
5 days after the attack on the Capitol, Representative Mo Brooks sent the email on the screen now. As you see, he emailed the White House, quote, pursuant to a request from Matt Gaetz, requesting a pardon for Representative Gaetz, himself, and unnamed others.
The general tone was, we may get prosecuted because we were defensive of, the president's positions on these things. The pardon that he was requesting, was as broad as you could describe. From the beginning, I remember he's from the beginning of time up until today, for any and all things. I think he mentioned Nixon, and I said Nixon's pardon was never nearly that broad.
I want to just briefly ask this question. You were a public official already when President Nixon went through all of the charges and investigations in the 70s. How does this episode compare to that?
Well, what Nixon did was wrong, and it was criminal. But I kind of viewed him as sort of a sad case, really. I don't view Trump as a sad case. I think that there's a difference between what Nixon did, and it was certainly self-serving, and what Trump has done, which is just kept the Constitution of the United States in his sights and aimed to destroy it. That's what's really serious today. It's not sort of individual corruption, venality. It's a direct attack on the country to serve self. That's what it is. It's a direct attack on the country. It's a direct attack on what makes us the United States of America. It's a direct attack on the peaceful transfer of power, the legitimacy of our election system, increasing a direct attack on the courts, on our justice system. It's a broadside type of attack against America and against our Constitution. And to me, that's more profound than the Nixon situation.
There were a small handful of individuals who put a stop to the attack in this instance. Mike Pence probably at the top of the list, and we just explained why. But there were a few others who played prominent roles. Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Attorney General Bill Barr. One of the things that's striking to me in looking at this group of patriots, who helped to put a stop to this attack, is that all of them are appointees of the president. And I think many people, probably myself included, fear that if Trump is elected again, now understanding potential points of weakness in the system and stress points, that he would put different people into key positions at the head of the Department of Defense. And do you share that concern?
Yes, definitely, no doubt.
Well, I want to close with perspectives from two other very senior, respected Republican leaders on some of these matters.
I think we agree that we have looked at his behavior, and his behavior suggests that this is a person who will impose his will, if he can, on the judicial system, on the legislative branch, and on the entire nation. I mean, when he called people to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, that was not a random date. That was the date when peaceful transfer of power was to occur. He called that on purpose. I mean, there's no question he has authoritarian rulings and interests and notions which he will try and impose. That's dangerous for the country. It was dangerous then. Life was lost. We were embarrassed around the world. I mean, this was a tragedy. And a number of the things he did in the last months of his presidency suggest what he'd do if he were elected again.
Was the last Republican presidential candidate before President Trump. And then just one more from former Vice President Dick Cheney.
In our nation's 246-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He is a coward. A real man wouldn't lie to his supporters. He lost his election, and he lost big. I know it, he knows it, and deep down, I think most Republicans know it.
Do you agree with former Vice President Cheney?
Yes, I agree with every word that he said and every word that Senator Romney said.
That there's never been an individual more dangerous to the Republic?
Never been anybody who's caused more damage to our country and continues to cause it than Donald Trump. And those who were complicit with him also bear an enormous amount of responsibility. Some are members of Congress. Some were his legal team, his enablers, his echo chamber in the media.
You meet a person, comes up to you on the street and introduces themselves. Senator Danforth, I always admired you and your work. What can I do to help in this period of time? What do you tell an average citizen? What can any of us do to be helpful now?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, and this wouldn't apply to everybody because I'm a Republican. What I'm saying is it's important to America to have a responsible conservative Republican Party. We don't have it now. It's important to America to reconstitute the political center. The political center has been decimated. We're too polarized. We've been pulled to the extremes now. It's important to reconstitute the center. And what I'm trying to do, my part of it, and the part of those of us who are part of our group, our Republican legacy, is to bring the Republican Party back to its fundamental principles, what we have always been standing for right since the beginning. We've got to do that. And so if the people who come up to me are Republicans, I'm going to say, let's restore our party. Let's revive our party. And let's push back. Too many people, I think, have given up. Too many Republicans, I know them. They've just given up. My gosh, this is awful, but we've been listening to be done. Yes, there is something to be done. We can push back. We've got to be more vocal. We've got to be more organized. And we've got to draw the exceptionally sharp contrast between what our party has been and should be to what it's become in the last 8 years. We've got to draw that contrast, and we've got to insist that the basic principles of our party are alive and well and will prevail.